is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Corey and Megan from the National Weather Service here. Thanks for joining us on the webinar today. We're going to give everybody a few more minutes to go ahead and join. We'll probably be starting just a minute or two right after the top of the hour. So again, we'll be coming back in about 2 minutes or so. Well, hello and good morning, everybody. And we want to thank you for joining us here on our webinar today. Today you've got me, Corey King. I'm going to kind of help Megan get things started here with some of the tech side of things. And then Megan Jones is going to be your presenter. She's basically one of our local climate experts here, and she's going to go through and talk a little bit about kind of the national winter outlook, and then maybe a little bit about how that kind of downscales to North Dakota as well. A couple things up front that I wanted to bring up just on the tech side of things is that within your go-to webinar, you should have a questions box, and there will be plenty of time for questions, and I would really encourage you to type any questions in there. That way we can see what you got, and we can read those out and then answer those here towards the end of the webinar. Otherwise, if you wanted to, we can go ahead and do an audio version too. So all you have to do is click your microphone. You should have a microphone with a orange color and a dash through it, so just use that. And then that'll be the thing that you're going to want to use to go ahead and unmute yourself once we unmute you. So you'll raise your hand for us, and then we'll go ahead and unmute you, and then that should hopefully be good to go for you on that. So with that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Megan, and she's going to do the presentation for you.
Thank you, Corey, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As Corey said, we really just wanted to take a minute and talk to our partners a little bit about the national winter outlook, and then also what we're thinking more on a local scale. Yes, the webinar will be recorded and distributed. We're going to be sending out a copy of the slides and a link to the YouTube video of the recording to everyone who registered for this webinar, for everyone who did not catch that. So we'll jump right in. This is the official Climate Prediction Center winter outlook. And winter on a meteorological season is December, January, February. You may have already seen this before. It was released on October 21st, and it got a lot of press coverage because everyone wants to know what the winter is going to be like. So over here on the left, we have the temperature outlook, and over here on the right, we have the precipitation outlook. So just to kind of explain what exactly we're looking at, in western and central North Dakota, we have this light blue shading, and then in eastern North Dakota is kind of this, there's no color to it. So for the blue shading, it's not a super dark blue, but it is blue, and that is leaning below for the temperatures for the season. So that means that we're favored for below average temperatures. Again, not super strong, but it is there. For eastern North Dakota, this no color is equal chances, and that can sometimes be misinterpreted as near normal. That's actually not what it means. It means that there are equal chances for above, below, or near normal temperatures. That basically means that when the forecasters are looking at the data, they're not really seeing a strong trend one way or the other. That's important because we look at the precipitation outlook, and you can see all of North Dakota has no color shading. So we're in this nice big area of equal chances, which means that, again, the forecasters saw nothing to really skew the forecast one way or the other. So by the books, this means that there are equal chances for above, below, or near normal precipitation. So, you know, not the most helpful when people are wondering what's going to be the winter precipitation. You know, equal chances for everything. So to kind of talk about what went into the outlooks, I need to give a little bit of a quick climate lesson, starting with what is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. Maybe you've heard of this. You've maybe heard of El Nino or La Nina. I know we talk about it a lot. Our broadcast partners talk about it a lot. But ENSO is this naturally occurring climate pattern that is based on sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. And there's an interaction between the ocean and the atmosphere. And this graphic over here on the right just kind of shows, you know, there are areas with warmer than average sea surface temperatures, colder than average sea surface temperatures, and that's going to influence the pressure patterns over the entire area. So when the forecasters are looking at this certain region in the ocean, they're looking at the temperature anomalies, and if they're warmer than normal, that is an El Nino, it's the warm phase of the oscillation. And if they're colder than normal, that's La Nina, it's the cold phase of the oscillation. And there are also different strengths to these events. So the threshold is plus or minus half a degree Celsius. So the further away from zero you get on either side, the stronger the ENSO event. So right now we do have a La Nina advisory in effect that was issued last month by the Climate Prediction Center forecasters. So that means that the forecasters are seeing the sea surface temperatures below half a degree Celsius. So that means that La Nina conditions are occurring. They have the sea surface temperature anomalies. They have the coupling with the atmosphere. And that these conditions are also expected to continue. You really need that part for the advisory to go in effect. The main question then is, why do we care about sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean when we live in North Dakota and we are pretty far from any ocean? And that is because the atmosphere likes to be in balance with itself. You know, if you have pressure changing in one part of the atmosphere, it wants to balance itself out. And if you have low pressure in one area, the atmosphere tries to get high pressure in another area. So everything is going to be connected. So when we're changing the pressure pattern over the Pacific Ocean, there are impacts to the continental US. This is the typical La Nina winter pattern that we end up seeing. Again, this is typical, this is not a guarantee, but when we have a La Nina ongoing, we typically end up with a blocking high pressure over the northern Atlantic. This high pressure is going to rotate clockwise, which ends up with the jet stream kind of arcing over the high pressure, becomes much more variable, and it can drop down right into the central US. This makes it much easier for the cold air in Alaska and Western Canada to be pulled into the continental US. And you can see this area of blue shading is where you typically end up with colder than average temperatures. And yes, that includes North Dakota. So that is why we have Western and Central North Dakota favored for below average temperatures on the winter outlook. I will note that this has been more inconsistent since about 1990. So that in part is why, for one, that favoring was not that strong. You know, the blue is only a light shading, not a dark shading, so not too high of confidence. And that's also why it didn't extend into eastern North Dakota. You know, if we just went by, you know, the typical La Nina pattern, that cold nose would expand a lot further into the region, but because it's been more inconsistent, the forecasters erred on the side of caution a little bit. What's also important is that the La Nina is expected to peak in intensity in January, which means that the greatest impacts are going to be in February and March. So really we're looking at, you know, this is going to be happening in the middle, late winter, and then heading into spring. So that's going to be important, especially because last winter, if you remember, we did have a La Nina as well, but that peaked earlier in the winter season. So, you know, we're looking at a different setup. You'll also remember that last winter did not exactly go as expected. We certainly were not colder for most of the winter. So we're hoping that this winter is maybe a little bit more of what we're expecting. The big thing to talk about with La Nina is that there's actually not really a strong influence on precipitation. It can be easy to fall into this trap of, you know, colder and snowier when we have a La Nina, when really we're only thinking colder. These are the precipitation anomalies for December, January, February for La Nina. And you can see the composite that, you know, there are some areas that have a strong composite with, you know, negative anomalies in the south, positive anomalies in the Pacific Northwest. And then you look at North Dakota and there's maybe one speck of green, but otherwise, you know, there's not a really strong anomaly either way with a La Nina event. However, when you look at the trend, you do start to see a little bit of a positive trend, which is where most of the composite and trend comes from. In some instances, you know, this is coming mainly from the composite, but in our case, you know, most of the change we've been seeing lately is from the trend. So I wanted to just kind of quickly highlight that here. We did a webinar earlier this year with the new 1991 to 2020 climate normals. So I wanted to highlight that at our main climate sites, you know, the December, January, February snowfall is increasing. So that's good news for us if you like snow, and we do need precipitation. So even though La Nina itself doesn't really have an influence, this is something that does. You know, we've been in a wet cycle for the past 20 years or so, and you really can see that in the climate normals. You can also see in the seasonal snow. I know this is just for winter, but you know, we get snow in the fall and in the spring. And at most of our sites, we are increasing our snow totals. Interestingly enough, at Bismarck, it was actually decreasing, but that was a loss of snow in the fall and the spring. And our yearly precipitation is actually increasing. So it was really that we're just losing a little bit of snow in the fall and the spring, which I thought was interesting. So just wanted to see that, you know, we are trending upwards with our snow totals in the winter at our main climate sites. This also shows the snowfall patterns during La Nina, and this is more related to the strength of the La Nina event, which I kind of touched on a little bit ago. This is the average snowfall pattern for weak La Nina years on the left, and on the right it's for strong La Nina years. And we were looking at this last winter. This was actually, you know, kind of on our radar because we did have a moderate to strong La Nina event, which was forecasted. So we were looking at this going, hey, we might have some below normal snowfall in the southwest and the south central. That's typically associated with stronger La Nina years compared to a weaker event where, you know, there's a better signal across the entire region for above average snowfall. This year is looking again like a moderate to strong La Nina. It was originally looking like a weaker La Nina, which was good news for our snow. But as we get closer, it has been, the forecast has been trending stronger. So that is kind of, you know, a negative factor where there is some data to suggest that parts of North Dakota that would lead to below average snowfall for the season. So that is one thing that we've been looking at. There are also, just as a quick aside, I'm not going to talk about all of these oscillations because this would just turn into a full-blown climate lesson. But there are a lot of different things that we look at that have a much shorter predictability than ENSO. The reason that ENSO is such a big influence in the climate outlooks is because there's a pretty good predictability on the 3 to 6 month time scale. But besides that and long-term trends and a few extended model guidance outputs, there's not a whole lot that the Climate Prediction Center can look at for these winter outlooks. Once we get into kind of the month-long range, there are suddenly a lot more things that we can look at, different oscillations, sudden stratospheric warming events, and those can have a significant influence on our weather. We actually had a sudden stratospheric warming event last January, which led to the significant cold air outbreak in February that was not only for North Dakota, but pretty much the entire central United States, all the way down to Texas. So those are things that, although we can't see them right now, we're always kind of keeping an eye on them. And as soon as we see something that might significantly influence our weather, we'll do our best to give you a heads up, especially, a couple weeks out if we see the potential for a cold air outbreak or maybe a really mild pattern when we're not expecting it. Those are things that we want to notify our partners of. So kind of going back to the La Nina aspect, especially the second of back-to-back La Ninas, there is some information we can pull from that. So over here on the right, this is just cycling through the winter temperature departure from normal for the second of back-to-back La Ninas. This was made from Brian Brettschneider, who is in NOAA up in Alaska. So he has a lot of really cool climate graphics that he makes. And so as it's cycling through, you can see that the departure from normal most times is cold. It's not guaranteed. There are some years where the second of the back-to-back La Ninas ended up being warm, but there is definitely a tilt to be colder than average. And when we compile all of these, this is the number of times second of back-to-back La Ninas was warmer than normal. You can see most of North Dakota fits into this dark blue, which is only 4 years out of 16, meaning that 12 out of the 16 years we were colder than normal. So again, it is possible to be warmer than normal, but we are definitely favored for below normal. That is a typical La Nina pattern. But then we also see that with the second of back-to-back La Ninas, maybe a little bit stronger of a trend compared to just all La Ninas. When we look at precipitation, there's definitely a weaker tilt, which is not too surprising. Precipitation can just, be skewed one way or the other a lot of the times, especially depending on if you can get 1 or 2 big storms that can really push up your snow totals. So again, the December through February precipitation percent of average for the second of back-to-back La Ninas. This will just kind of cycle through, and you can see, sometimes there's a wet signal for part of the area, sometimes there's a dry signal. It can kind of be hit or miss. And so when we compile these, there could still be some sort of wet signal. Again, this is the number of times the second La Nina winter was wetter than normal, the total amount of years. You can see, in the south central, definitely a little bit of a wet signal, maybe in the east as well. Again, not a guarantee, but, that's an encouraging sign for an area that really could use some precipitation. So just another thing that we've been looking at in the past couple weeks. So the big question, what exactly are we expecting? That's why you're all on this webinar, I'm sure. For temperature, we are expecting it to stay mild through the rest of the fall. That is pretty common as we are approaching a La Nina winter. We've already seen above average temperatures in September and in October. We are expecting that to continue through November. Kind of a transition month during December as the La Nina intensifies, maybe not cold, not warm like we're seeing in the fall, but a little bit of a transition. And then as the La Nina peaks in January, and then the main impacts are, it's strongest in February and March. That is when we'll see these normal to below normal temperatures in that January through March timeframe. It is interesting because with the new climate normals, January was actually warming, but February, there's a strong cold signal, and there's also a cooling signal in the entire spring season. So by that, I'm really guessing that February and March are going to be when it's coldest. And I think with the spring cooling trend, I know people who have lived here for a long time can certainly notice that the winter seems to hang on the spring a lot more than it used to. And especially because our falls are warming, so it's almost like a shift in the winter season where it really doesn't start until November, December, but then it lingers a lot through March and April, kind of into that growing season period. So that's something that we're going to be paying attention to is, the potential for below normal temperatures, especially February and March. As far as precipitation goes, this is much trickier to be thinking about precipitation on an entire seasonal scale, but by the books, by the Climate Prediction Center outlook, and what you maybe want to prepare for is that all outcomes are possible this winter. That's above, below, or near normal precipitation. There's not a super strong trend one way or the other, and especially because we didn't really have anything last winter. You especially want to be paying attention for that first winter storm. You just want to be prepared for what that could bring since we haven't had to deal with it in a while. Compared to climatology, it's really unlikely that we have as little or even less snow than last winter. On the entire Bismarck snow record, there are only 2 winters where we had back-to-back season snow totals less than 20 inches. We have a pretty long record, so very unlikely that we have that type of snow amounts like we did last winter. It is encouraging that the new climate normals show increased precipitation for December, January, February. And it also is encouraging that there is kind of a slight tilt towards above normal precipitation in the second of back-to-back La Niñas. So at this point, my gut is kind of telling me normal to above normal precip. Again, all we need is 1 or 2 big snowstorms that can really bump our averages up compared to, if we have a bunch of small events throughout the winter. So we'll have to see how that turns out, but with the La Nina looking different than it did last year, peaking later in the winter, the second of back-to-back La Ninas, it's certainly a different setup than last winter, so hopefully we can have a bit of a different outcome than last winter. And we just want to remind you, every La Nina is going to be different. Again, these are no guarantees. Last winter we had a La Nina and we were very mild in December and January, which is not really what we were expecting, as well as the significantly below average snowfall. And even if we're speaking about mild periods or cold periods, that doesn't mean it's going to be only that. We know that our weather can swing from one extreme to the other pretty quickly here in North Dakota, and it's not normally around normal. We go from one to the other. And just remember, perspective is important. Again, having a couple high impact events compared to frequent low impact events throughout the winter. Just some bonus content I wanted to throw in here. The drought has obviously been a big thing. And of course, any precipitation through the rest of fall and into the winter is going to help with drought conditions. The main thing we are hoping for is that we have a normal to above normal snowpack in the late winter and spring. That'll really give us the runoff and replenish the soil moisture that we're hoping for as we go into the growing season. So, the La Nina peaking in January with the strongest impacts in February and March might be good news for this. If we can get, the below average temperatures, but also have a good snowpack that can hang on as we go into the spring, that would be really good for the drought conditions. We'll have to see. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on it. Just wanted to update everyone. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions. As Corey said earlier, you can feel free to type them into the question box, or we can unmute people if we want. And there's my contact information. You can always email me with any sort of climate-related questions.
All right, Megan, thank you for a great presentation there today. I guess before we jump into all the questions, I think one of the things that you brought up that was really important was that even if we have a, I guess, kind of normal snow season this year, it'd probably feel relatively harsh compared to last year, wouldn't you say? I mean, that's something to really, I think, keep in mind as we go into this year. Even normal is probably going to seem probably a little abnormal based on what we saw last year.
Yeah, last year Bismarck only reported 16.7 inches of snow, and our normal is 50.5. So that is definitely a difference. And I know if we get a snowstorm, I don't know how prepared I'll be. It's probably going to feel pretty harsh.
Awesome. Well, again, as Megan said, this would be the time if you have any questions to either put them in the questions box for us, and then we'll go ahead and read them off so everybody can hear what your question is. Otherwise, if you want to ask it over your audio connection, whether it be via the computer or your phone line, go ahead and raise your hand, and then we will unmute you, and then you will still have to more than likely unmute yourself as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and see if we have any questions that come in.
And just to reiterate, we will be sending out a copy of the slides as well as a copy of the recording of this presentation to everyone who registered for this webinar. Feel free to share that with your colleagues. If you had someone that couldn't make it to this webinar, definitely feel free to share with them. We're not trying to hide the information or anything, so we'll make sure we get that sent out to everyone.
We will give one last call for questions. Otherwise, right now, I'm not seeing any so far. So unless we get one last one here to jump on in, I'll say thank you for taking the time out to join us for this. And we really appreciate you attending. And again, as Megan said, we'll go ahead and get this sent out as quick as we can. It might be kind of the early afternoon before you get it, but we'll definitely get that out to you. And again, thanks everybody for attending.